you can't look away from the milestones, and we're now the worst in the whole of Europe, despite having those warnings, those alarm bells that were sounded on the other side of the world as long ago as January, and just, you know, a hop, skip and a jump across the water as recently as February, as long ago as February, the month in which Boris Johnson elected to take a fortnight's holiday. And we've now got the worst death toll in Europe. At what point do the increasingly desperate and pathetic attempts to portray this government's performance as anything other than catastrophic stop? Just in all honesty, by all that is decent, how many people do we have to bury before everybody recognises that a lot of those people didn't have to die? Even I began to get a bit tired of mentioning Germany all the time. And you'd say to me, well, if it was the other way around, James, they'd be shouting it from the rooftops. And I'd say, I'm not really sure that's the point, you know? And you can see what they're doing next. They're already putting it in place. Oh, now is not the time. Well, when is the time? Now is not the time for well, when then? When is the time? When will the government give me permission to scrutinise the government? When will be an appropriate time to ask just how many dead people would still be alive today if the political response had been different and the political leadership has been present? I don't know, because it's just happened, and I'm very, very, very conscious of the burdens that we all carry at the moment, but, you know, I'm getting paid for this, so I'm more conscious of the burdens that you carry, perhaps, than any that I may be required to do so, because that's my job. But does that change it for you? The fact that, and this day has been coming for a while now, but it's now formal, it's now confirmed, feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only a couple of months that we were talking most days about the situation in Italy. We were taking calls from Italian-based from listeners in Italy. There you go. Not a complicated concept, really. And they were telling us, it is, what is it now, 6 weeks since I read you that message from my friend in Gran Canaria saying, what on earth are you doing in that country? And still they say, oh, yes, a lot of people are asking us about our success. And when they realise that won't wash, well, now is not the time to ask these questions. And if you are a critic of the fact that we have the biggest death toll in the country, then they'll be going through your bins as I speak, looking for any old Jeremy Corbyn badges or evidence that you might have once voted for the Labour Party. As if that matters. Secretary of State for Culture writing to the BBC at the weekend, without a single substantive complaint about that Panorama programme. Not a single word of challenge to anything that the medics on that programme said, but expressing displeasure about the fact that they have not pledged allegiance to the Conservative Party before agreeing to appear upon the programme. That's how I read it. Of course, they phrased it slightly differently and said that they should have declared that these people have political allegiances to the Labour Party. Although quite what that means in the current climate, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. If you were a big Ed Miliband fan, it's quite possible that you would have considered Jeremy Corbyn to be the worst thing that's happened to the Labour movement since it started. So what does that even mean? But it doesn't matter, does it? Because everything about these people is about evading responsibility. They're playing with the country as if it were a train set. That speech haunts me, you know. 4 days after the whole mess started, 4 days after the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, and Boris Johnson was talking about one country needs to go in a different direction, to step into the phone box as Clark Kent and come out as Superman. I still don't really understand what he was talking about. Although, it's perfectly possible he didn't really either at the time. But here we are now, biggest death toll in Europe, and what are we supposed to do with that? How hard do you have to tug your forelock to pretend that that doesn't matter? How hard do you have to tug your forelock to pretend that this doesn't matter? And of course, I know better than anybody what the problem is. The problem is that some of us have been screaming for years what these people were like, and you screamed back that they weren't. So you can't, can you, contemplate yet the possibility or just the scale of how wrong you were? I don't care. There's no shame involved. No humiliation or embarrassment. We all make mistakes. But now, if you're not prepared to admit at least a mistake of trust, then you've got the job of explaining to yourself, because I don't really want to hear it, explaining to yourself why the largest death toll in Europe isn't evidence of the worst response.
The reason they will never admit a mistake is because of a concept that James O'Brien himself pretty much invented. The idea of footballism. The idea that I will defend my team come what may. And they will never admit a mistake because that would admit that the team has a problem. And you, in politics, must always defend your team. This is the mentality of many people. My team is the Conservative Party. I will defend the Conservative Party come what may. My team is the Labour Party. I will defend them to my dying breath. This is a huge problem, and what it does is it ignores reality and circles the wagons in order to defend the party. And unfortunately, I don't see this changing in the short term or in the long term. And I think it's utterly disgraceful that Boris Johnson took a 2-week holiday in February. Just as the virus was getting a foothold in Europe, that was the moment for proactive measures against the virus. But instead he went on friggin' holiday. How can he justify that? That was the moment to act. That was the moment to use whatever power you had to buy PPE, to organise a response to this virus. But this is just typical of Boris Johnson. Remember during the floods before the election, he was dragged kicking and screaming out to meet with the public. He didn't want to do that. He seems to be the type of person who just wants to sit and wait for the crisis to pass by. It will fix itself. It will resolve itself. This is his way of thinking. Now, I have to push back a little bit here on James O'Brien regarding Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock was complimented by James a few days ago on his radio station. Now he's criticising the government for dragging their feet. But Matt Hancock has to take responsibility for this also. I understand that Boris Johnson has to take the ultimate responsibility, but Matt Hancock is the health secretary. He is the one making the day-to-day decisions. I think it was completely wrong of James O'Brien to defend Matt Hancock the other day. Matt Hancock has to take responsibility. If he's not satisfied with the situation, if he's not able to get what he wants, he should resign. He should make it public and say, I have tried to do my best, but the government under Boris Johnson will not give me what I need, so I am doing the honourable thing and resigning. But he's not going to do that because he is part of the yes man club. He's part of the sycophancy that is supporting Boris Johnson at the moment. Now, James said something else here. He said, and I quote, "How many people do we have to bury before everybody recognises those people didn't have to die?" Welcome to the party, James. You could ask the same question regarding homelessness, NHS cuts, and the criminal universal credit system. Of course, the response from the right will always be, now is not the time. Of course, this is a tool used by the right on a continuous basis when there's a legitimate criticism for the government, and if that government is a right-wing government. The response from the media, from politicians, from their supporters on the right will always be, now is not the time. Show some sensitivity, show some consideration for the victims. And of course, this is something you see also in the United States following a mass shooting. Please don't talk about gun control now. Let's send our thoughts and prayers to the victims. It's a typical tool used by the right to avoid the issue at hand. Now, an interesting question I had received on the last live stream related to this was, would the situation be different if Jeremy Hunt had been Prime Minister? Now, if we turn our minds back to last year when there was the leadership challenge and it was pretty much head-to-head between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt. If Jeremy Hunt had won, would the situation be different today? And I think it's difficult to say, but I would probably say yes. I think Jeremy Hunt would have dealt with this crisis in a different way. I don't think he would have gone on holiday in February. I don't think he would have went around boasting about shaking hands with people who were allegedly infected. I don't think he would have said ridiculous statements such as, we're going to take it on the chin and it'd be over in 6 weeks' time. So I think there would have been less of a Trumpian response to this crisis and more of perhaps a level-headed professional politician approach to it. Of course, the response would always be to defend the party first and then eventually the people. But at the same time, I think Jeremy Hunt would have dealt with this crisis in a much better way than Boris Johnson currently is. So let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are much appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.